Now we're welcomed into the White House. And that's just a massive change. I think we want this industry to thrive in the United States. We don't want to push it offshore where you have fewer regulations.
I think the reason I keep pushing you, too, is because I think now it's widely accepted that this is a pro-crypto administration. But the details, that is what's causing an overhang, the uncertainty of the details. So to the extent you have confidence, right, about XRP being in that stockpile or otherwise getting more support for an ETF, for example, where does that confidence come from and what kind of timeline do you see it happening on?
So I have immense confidence on the ETF. I think there's 11 different filings pending with the SEC to launch ETFs from everybody from Bitwise to Franklin Templeton and a whole bunch of people in between. I think those will be live in the second half of this year. We have seen, even outside the United States, you have live ETPs. And at a time when a lot of outflows are exiting some of the crypto ETFs, you're seeing inflows into XRP. And I think that's because you had this false negative pressure from the SEC, this kind of, you know, an exogenous hand holding things down that's now being released. And that's great for the market. That's great for builders within the XRP ecosystem globally.
One more on the stockpile.
Yeah.
How much XRP would be in it? Where does it come from?
Well, my understanding of what I read about I think there are some questions, and that, you know, the devil may be in the details as Treasury implements some of this.
Absolutely in the details.
But my understanding is that the stockpile will be represented by seized other cryptos other than Bitcoin that then will be in that stockpile. So to the extent that various law enforcement agencies have seized cryptos, which would include XRP, that those would go into the stockpile in addition to the Bitcoin strategic reserve. That's my understanding.
We have been talking here about a big moment for you and for your company, of course, a rollback, really, of the tensions that had been brewing with the SEC. And let's talk about the next phase. One thing I'm really wondering about now that there's more clarity for you is that is an IPO, frankly, in your future now. We talk so much about the potential for the XRP token to be wrapped in an ETF. That is a method of listing. Right. So is listing possible now for you for Ripple?
Well, it's certainly something that is possible. The United States SEC under Gensler was so hostile to this industry. I mean, ironically, they approved the S1 from Coinbase and then sued them for doing the things they said they were doing. So this SEC, fortunately, is going to be, I think, very constructive and positive for this industry. So I think that's available, and I think the company's at a stage where we can consider that. That being said, it isn't a huge priority. You know, I think most companies are going public. Raising capital is something that is high on their radar. You know, we have been in a very fortunate position to be able to grow the business organically. We're also, frankly, more proactive in looking at acquisitions. This is an industry that finally is going to be able to thrive in the United States, the largest economy in the world. And I think the industry is still underestimating the shift from the headwinds to the tailwinds. That's going to make a bigger difference than people think. And finally, the U.S. market is really unlocked.
So it sounds like what you're saying, acquisitions are almost more of a priority now than an IPO for you. So then what would you be looking for to buy, and how big are you willing to go?
Well, I'm not going to name names, but look, Ripple at its core is a blockchain infrastructure company. We sell our technologies to business, primarily financial institutions, and we'll look at other things that are blockchain infrastructure companies. I think there will be consolidation this year. There's a lot of excitement about some of the changes, and we will lean into that for sure.
So when you think about what's possible in terms of financial institutions, there's been a lot of conversation about loosening of regulations and red tape when it comes to the financial industry and its interactions with the crypto community. What are you actually seeing happen? Are banks really warming up in a way that's significant right now?
I mean, I think unequivocally, yes. I mean, just in the last few weeks, I have seen U.S. financial institutions go from being like, look, we're just not going to touch it because we don't want the extra scrutiny of the regulators, which, again, may or may not have even been legal, given these are legal businesses. But you have large banks who used to say negative things, now saying positive things. I think the two areas you'll see the most activity in the short term, one is around custody. These are banks that want to be able to custody, particularly when you see real-world assets being tokenized. You need to be able to safely manage and custody that for customers and potentially for the bank. And the second is around payments. I mean, the global payments infrastructure still remains very dated. Wires are slow. I just had a wire that was sending over euros disappear for 5 days. That's surprising in a world of the internet.
So one part of that payments infrastructure that I'm watching really closely is, of course, stablecoins.
Sure.
There is starting to be more clarity in Washington, and you're seeing people starting to use stablecoins in really interesting ways. I think about Robinhood, for example, using stablecoin in terms of facilitating 24-hour trading. What's next? I mean, if you think about the next forefront of stablecoins now that the U.S. is getting toward clarity, what's possible?
Well, again, I think we're underestimating how big that might get. You know, today that market's about $230 billion. So I think some smart people think that may go up 10x in the next 5 years. I think that's probably right. I mean, the two leading players in Tether as well as USDC are both, I think, poised to do well in that market. Ripple launched our own stablecoin at the end of last year. That's already ahead of our own internal forecasts in terms of where we are at this point in the year. Still, we're small, but the goal is by the end of the year for RLUSD, Ripple stablecoin, to be one of the top 5 in the market by the end of the year. And I think the whole market's going to grow dramatically over this year.
So what does it take you to get there? Who are you pairing up with? Are you creating some financial partnerships in order to make RLUSD more of a household name?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even today we had more listings go live for RLUSD on some global crypto exchanges. Anytime you do something new, it takes a minute for that kind of, the pun of the ripple effect of seeing how that plays out. And so we're seeing that happen in real time. So I'm really pleased. And again, as I said, we're ahead of our Q1 forecasts of where we expect it to be. So we feel really good about that progress.
Given through what you have gone through with the SEC, I think one major question is how tokens list in the future. What do they mean? How are they classified? Now that you're talking about many other, say even private equity companies looking to tokenize their funds, venture capitalists, Cathie Wood told us yesterday she's considering that for her own fund. What does this mean? What are the rules of the road? Are people going to list and put the cart in front of the horse as they do so? Yeah.
Well, look, I think tokenizing, like what Cathie Wood's talking about, democratizing access to different investment vehicles and different investment types is very compelling. Even, imagine Shark Tank enabling the participation by different sharks. Like, there's some really interesting stuff you could do. Right now, Congress, it seems, is more focused on getting stablecoin legislation passed. That went for markup last week, and I think you'll see that potentially in front of the president in weeks. The other piece of legislation I think will move quickly after that is kind of the market structure bill. Last summer, something called FIT 21 passed the House, did not get through the Senate. I think that a market structure bill like FIT 21 will come before Congress. Hopefully before the summer recess, we'll see that pass also.
But you think about how many exchanges are now looking to loosen their listing standards already on the heels of lighter oversight, and the cart before the horse question. Do you think that people are getting a little ahead of themselves and listing things that shouldn't be listed?
Well, look, I don't think about it as lighter regulation because, frankly, I think the industry wants to be regulated. And what we've been saying for years as an industry is we just want clear regulation. We don't want lawsuits just claiming one thing and the next week contradicting themselves, which is exactly what Gensler's SEC was doing. So I think just the fact that we have an SEC who's trying to work constructively, instead of trying to sue more companies, let's actually work and let's codify and get legislation to provide that clarity.
But again, if you don't have that clarity, what you saw years ago was an ICO boom where tons of things that were raising money never worked out for the people that were buying the tokens or the coins.
Look, I agree, and I said then that I think of some of these ICOs were a lot more like IPOs. They were securities. The problem is the SEC then kind of used that to just blanket and say, Gensler said before he was SEC chair, he didn't think they were securities. And then after he became SEC chair, is kind of his power grab. Gensler wanted everything under his jurisdiction. So I think, obviously, that ICO boom went away, and there's lots of ways this government can regulate and manage fraud and manage criminal activity. And that did happen. People did go to jail.
I have one more question for you about Ripple and XRP in particular on the supply and how it's managed and the unlocks. Is there anything you would do to change the amount of supply brought to market? Can you do that? How does that exactly work? Because there is a level of dilution for XRP when more supply is brought in on a regular basis.
So this is one of the things I'm glad you asked about, because there's frankly misinformation, sometimes disinformation, people spreading falsehoods out there. The amount of XRP that was created in 2012 when it was first started, when that blockchain was first started, was 100 billion units. That can't be increased. It's slightly deflationary, and now there's about 99.9 billion units. Ripple owns about 42% of that supply. we have had, and for, I guess, 8 years, we published something called the XRP Markets Report, where we share how much we are introducing into the market, because we want that to be predictable. And that has been the case for many years now. And so we will continue to make sure that's very predictable. At some point, maybe we won't be selling as much. We'll see how that plays out in the future. But right now, frankly, we get criticized for owning too much, and then we're criticized for selling some. But we want to do that in a constructive way, which is what we've done for years.